Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, officially week one, in one of the more underrated matchups that we're going to see week one. Penn State heading on the road to play West Virginia. All the college football fans, all the national media analysts want to talk about Georgia, Clemson, and Miami, Florida. Look, we're excited about those football games as well. But you look at Penn State heading on the road to a West Virginia team that went 9-3 last year. This is a fascinating game. You're already starting to see some of the players go back and forth on Twitter. This is going to be a chippy game. This is going to be an electric environment in Morgantown, West Virginia as well. Fire me up for this one. Want to get into a few key matchups, obviously give the game predictions. These two teams match up in I think, a very unique way where you look at West Virginia. They want to run the football a lot. They're going to be running the football against the defense that was number one in the country in rushing defense last year. But they also want to throw the football down the field. Penn State has to replace a couple of names in the secondary. Want to get into some of those matchups. Now, before we do, and as always, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. The best part about doing these game predictions is talking ball with you guys, whether you agree with the takes, whether you just disagree with the takes, whether you're mixing it up with opposing fan bases. That is the best part about this. So would love to hear from y'all. And if you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And then without further ado, I personally want to start with this Penn State offense going up against this West Virginia defense because I want to dig into, what do you think Coach Kotelnicki brings to this Penn State offense?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, he's going to bring some more creativity. I think
yes.
Penn State get into their ruts. And obviously, they always move the ball against the teams they should have beaten and the teams they out-talented because they could always run it. They have a lot of skill. I think people don't kind of realize that. But it felt like when they got into those big games, they just had like clammy offensive coordinators who got really, really scared and just went to really, really basic things. When you look at Kotelnicki, there's always a lot going on. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of pre-snap movement, and they do try to get really creative. So that's kind of what I'm going to be looking for from Penn State in this game. And obviously, I think there's probably some level where Penn State might just be simply good enough to move the ball on West Virginia, just like they were last year. But I really want to see them try to get to something a little bit different than what we've seen.
I'm just fired up to see what Coach Kotelnicki wants to do with this Penn State offense, where it's a little bit of a different personnel than what we saw with Kansas over the last couple of years. But the amount of talent on this offense is probably better than what he had at Kansas. And so I look at, and the Penn State fans know, I don't think there's a bigger fan of Coach K than I am. I used to just, when I was feeling down back in the day, I would just watch a little Kansas offense and it would immediately pick me up. They'll not only creativity, but it's like intentional creativity. Like, we're going to attack linebackers. We're going to attack safeties with their eyes. We're going to give a lot of eye candy. How much pre-snap motion did we see for Penn State last year? Almost absolutely nothing. You saw no sort of wrinkles or creativity. And at the end of the day, that's how you move the ball in college football. Yes, you want to have stuff that you can go to, but you look at all the best offenses, they have certain concepts that try to attack the opposing defense. I felt like Penn State just kind of lacked that last year. Now, I think the big misconception about Coach Kotelnicki that I hear in the national media is that he's going to come and kind of reinvigorate this passing attack, which he will to an extent. You go back to Kansas last year, they ran the football 60% of the time. That was 12th most in the country. So Penn State is going to run the football. They have two of the most talented running backs in the country, but the wrinkle that Coach K is going to throw in is when we decide to throw the football, we're going to be intentional about hitting explosive plays. You look back at Kansas, again, ran the football most of the time, 10.2 yards per pass attempt. That was number 2 in the country. What was Penn State looking for the most in their new offensive coordinator? Was hitting explosive plays in the passing attack. That is exactly what Coach Kotelnicki is going to bring. It's not going to be some sort of air raid where they're throwing the ball 50 times a game, but they're going to be intentional when they do throw to hit those explosive plays. And I would think I'd argue that they have some weapons on the outside to manufacture some of those explosive plays. A guy like Julian Fleming, who I think is flying massively under the radar during this offseason.
And I think the key to it is getting guys in good positions and on the matchups you want them. I
Agreed.
think when you go to that Texas game, let's say, where Kansas was, they were obviously outgunned by that Texas team, but they had a couple moments where they got a good matchup against the safety or got a good matchup against a linebacker, and they'd take advantage of it. I felt like, again, when you go to think about what Penn State was always doing, it was kind of just like, okay, go ask Keandre Lambert-Smith to go beat the number 1 corner for Ohio State or Michigan or one of those teams where yes, he can do that against the second tier teams, let's say the third tier teams. When he's going up against Will Johnson or Burks, those guys are just good. I mean, you're not just going to beat them one-on-one without doing anything creative, not consistently enough at least.
Yeah, and I'm also really excited to see what the rushing attack looks like because he got creative running the football as well. Like, it wasn't very bland, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see a lot of 2 running back sets. One of the things Coach Kolnick is a genius at is looking at his personnel and saying, all right, who are the best football players on the field? How can we get them on the field at the same time? And how can we get the football into their hands? Like, 2 of your best football players are in the backfield. What are the creative ways that you can use them in the backfield to get them in space and let them be a little bit more explosive in that rushing attack? I think it's one of the most underrated storylines in all of college football. Like, people would kind of mention it in passing. Oh, new offensive coordinator, Coach Kolnick coming in. I don't think people realize the ramifications that it could have. Now, I do want to switch over to, I think, a really fascinating matchup where I would say I was a massive fan of what West Virginia did on offense last year, where they were going to run the football a lot, 62% of the time. That was number 6 in the country. West Virginia ran the football just about more than any other program besides the military academies, and they had a lot of success doing it, 5.2 yards per carry. That was top 15 in the country. But when they decided to throw the football, they were asking Garrett Green to push it. And I think there's a really, kind of shallow analysis with Garrett Green where people will just look at his completion percentage and say, all right, but guy completed 53% of his footballs, can't be a good quarterback. His average depth of target was 13.5 yards. That was double what Bo Nix's was last year. And so that completion percentage statistic needs to be kind of contextualized. This West Virginia team asked Garrett Green to push the ball down the field often, and that could be something West Virginia has some success with, where you look at Penn State and say, one, new defensive coordinator in Tom Allen, who I think is a really good hire. But I think the question is, how well does this secondary kind of come together under Tom Allen? Because you are replacing some names that went to the NFL draft. Can West Virginia find those explosive plays to give them a chance in this football game? That's kind of what I'm looking for here.
And that's going to be a huge part of it. But I think one thing people kind of overlook as well about Garrett Green is by the end of the year, they were starting to ask him to play more quarterback, if you will.
Yeah, agreed.
That Penn State West Virginia game early in the year, it was pretty much either you're running the ball or you're throwing it downfield, and there was nothing in between. I think when you're trying to set things up, be able to create bigger plays, it can't be just a two-dimensional. Like, you can't just have 2 plans of attack, if you will, and that's kind of all you can go to. I think with this West Virginia team, when they were at their best, like in that Baylor game, let's say, you saw Garrett Green doing everything. And when he was playing really well, just like straight up quarterback, we all know he can run. He's very effective. He knows how to do it. He knows how to handle the ball. But when he's playing good quarterback and he's being accurate in the short intermediate range, I think that opens up so much for this offense. And frankly, if they can't do that at all against Penn State's just too good. Garrett Green needs to be able to do like those
a little bit more. I do agree with that. And I think there was times last year where West Virginia didn't really have a ton of confidence in Garrett Green to be a true quarterback that's making all the throws. From what I'm hearing coming out of like fall camp and spring practice, like there's a lot of confidence within Garrett Green running this offense going into this 2024 season. So I'm kind of interested to see if they ask a little bit more of him at that quarterback spot. A couple other things that I would note is, one, this offensive line is really good and it's really experienced. And I think on paper, you lose guys like Frazier and say, all right, they're going to take a step back on the offensive line. Look, Zach Frazier was an awesome offensive lineman, one of the best in maybe the best in West Virginia history. That being said, they still have, you look at the offensive line, it's 3 redshirt seniors and 2 guys who are going into their 4th year. Like, this is an experienced offensive line. Multiple guys on the offensive line have over 1,000 or 2,000 career snaps. I think this offensive line has a chance at, kind of dealing with Penn State's pass rush to an extent. Now, we didn't see a single team really be able to deal with what Penn State could do rushing the passer. Penn State is going to get theirs. That's going to be a really intriguing battle because I like West Virginia's offensive line, but you look at Abdul Carter, Danny Dennis Sutton, those guys are kind of different animals. I think one of the things you're looking for is, can West Virginia kind of stay on schedule, avoid some of those negative plays that, Penn State made a living on in the 2023 season?
And that's why I think Garrett Green's ability to run the ball, I think, is crucial. I think we kind of just saw in that Georgia Tech Florida State game, that ability for the quarterbacks to run can really do a lot in slowing down defensive ends, especially when you have to deal with read options, and you got to put some responsibility on those guys to play a little bit less free. Because if you let Danny Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter just kind of go free
years back
after you, like,
not
there's
good.
not really any chance you're blocking those guys. But again, when you have a good athletic running quarterback who is really proficient in running that read option kind of attack, you can do a little bit to slow them down. And then I think you're right. Like, West Virginia is not one of those teams that I think will just get blown off the ball. And I don't think they're favored in that matchup, if you will. The Penn State defensive line is certainly better than the West Virginia.
I don't know if I'm taking a single offensive line over Penn State's defensive line heading in.
But I also don't think West Virginia is so far below that you'll like turn the TV on and be like, oh, there's nothing they can do. They're not.
Yeah, and I think one other thing I have in my notes is West Virginia had over 20 drops last year, and it was a problem. Like, you listen to a lot of West Virginia, like the people who are watching West Virginia every single snap, and we watched a decent amount of West Virginia, like the drops in big moments were a problem. If you want to win this football game, you can't have those plays that you give up. You know what I mean? You have to be making those kind of plays to win you this football game. Though, let's get into the pick here. The line's been moving down, right? It opened up. We previewed this game about a month ago. It was around 10.5. And I kind of said, I don't know if I love Penn State outside of 10 points. It's down to 8.5. What's your pick here?
Yeah, it's Penn State under 10. I kind of was like, oh, outside of 10, it gets a little bit closer. But
agreed.
Not giving them 10 points against West Virginia, I think Penn State's going to be able to score. They could score on teams like West Virginia last year. They couldn't score on a couple teams. If that gets a little bit like turbocharged, let's say, by finding some more explosiveness and ability to scheme some things open where it didn't all have to be like hard, if you will. I mean, Penn State scores a lot of points. I don't see West Virginia playing them that tight.
I'm going to take Penn State too. I like West Virginia. Like, I am very high, probably one of the higher people around the country on this West Virginia team. I think this is such a bad matchup for them. Like, you look at what West Virginia wants to do, running the football 62% of the time. I just really have a hard time seeing them eat up Penn State on the lines of scrimmage and have success running the football. And then that might hurt what they want to do in terms of play action and pushing the ball down the field. I think this is a game that's a lot better than a lot of people think it's going to be. And if West Virginia can hit some of those explosive plays and you get Garrett Green, you get that high version of Garrett Green, that's a difference maker. That's a dynamic quarterback. I think this game can be fun, especially at home. That being said, I'm going to rock with Penn State as well, especially inside of 10 points. Really fun game. Might a live reaction after this football game because this is going to be a very fun one. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys again. Whether you agree with us, whether you disagree, would love to hear from y'all in the comment section. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.